Avowed. I don't know if people remember, but Avowed was like one of the first games announced when Microsoft acquired Obsidian back in, who knows, like
What?
2019, 2020.
Damn.
It was announced then. It had a very grim, dark trailer then, and it was used
Oh,
as a
I
big
remember
like,
that. Yeah, and that was
yeah,
you just unlocked a memory because I remember seeing that trailer and I think a lot of people thought, "Damn, is this the modern day Skyrim, whatever?"
yeah,
It had
basically.
that same vibe.
Let's see when it was actually launched. Avowed, the reveal trailer was 4 years ago, so yeah, 2021, around about then. Yeah, a lot of people there were like, "Oh, this is Microsoft's like a Skyrim, in a sense, especially in terms of tone and whatever." And it is that still that. I think the tone is very, very different. But in terms of the overall loop and core structure, it's very Skyrim-like. I feel like this is the sort of game that if you've been pining for a new Skyrim experience that still feels like in some ways rooted in 2011, then sure, you've definitely got that. But it's also got like a lot of enhancements to that sort of formula that I think work in some ways and super don't work in others.
Yeah.
But before I get ahead of myself, Avowed is set in the Pillars of Eternity universe, because Obsidian did Pillars of Eternity and Pillars of Eternity Deadfire, I think it was called, and then there's a board game, and then it's a whole universe. It's a whole big thing. But Avowed takes place in a portion of that world which is kind of segregated from everything else. So the story you're undertaking there is somewhat segmented from the overall universe, but carries the baggage of that universe with it. So you'll speak to a load of characters that reference past events. They reference certain races, certain monarchies, relationships between factions and monarchies. And initially it's like, oh, it's like exposition central. There's so many terms and names thrown out in conversations, which seem so obscure and confusing. The upshot is that you have like a sort of glossary that you can reference during conversations to be like, cool, what is this word that was highlighted? Okay, that is a race of beings that used to live here and no longer exist, or this is one empire that you actually hail from, or stuff like that. So you can kind of get context for what these people are talking about. It kind of doesn't disappear though, so I found myself constantly having to reference these glossaries 90% of the time, and then or like try and wrap all this context around the motivations of characters in the here and now, and it becomes a bit like messy and very easy to gloss over because I'm just like this I feel like I'm plopped in the middle of a story that I don't fully understand. The narrative itself as well is kind of a nothing really. It feels bad to say, but you are a envoy that comes from a kingdom across the ocean called Adir, I think it is. And you are in the Living Lands, which is the setting of Avowed, to kind of investigate this plague that is ravaging the lands there. And it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Like, your kingdom is kind to wrestle back control of this region because it's kind of a paradise for pirates and scholars and mages and the sorts of people that don't want to be oppressed by a monarchy or a more authoritarian like regime. So you're sent there by the king of Adia. You are also this being called a godlike. There are these people in the Pillars of Eternity universe that have, when they're born, they've been touched by a god. They've kind of had like abilities bestowed on them by a god, and all of the time, they know which god has like given them this grace, essentially, because gods are just things that exist in the Eternity universe. You are a confusing godlike because you don't know which god gave you its blessing.
Okay.
Which a lot of characters find very peculiar and strange. And so you land on the Living Lands, you get a very quick introduction to this plague. Very quickly into the story, this voice starts talking to you inside of your head, and I think within 30 seconds, I was like, cool, this is the god that actually, this is the reason why I'm the godlike. And turns out like 10, 15 hours in, that's kind of exactly what happened. So the point I bring that up is that there's nothing in Avowed that feels especially surprising. A lot of it's telegraphed in very obvious ways.
Yeah.
And the story just kind of goes through the motions that you expect to go through. And so it just doesn't feel that impactful throughout. I didn't find it really surprising or interesting. The companions themselves aren't that surprising, aren't that like interesting to engage with. You get 4 of them. I think the most impactful one is Kai, who's the first one you get. He's like this sort of like fish human thing. He's confusing because I think you meet him within the first half an hour of the game, and you just wash up like in the living lands for after this like shipwreck, and he's like, cool, you're the envoy from blah 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 empire, and you've come to investigate the plague. I'll go with you. And like within an hour, this dude's ready to lay his life for you. It's like you have saved his firstborn son. Amazing. And he is ready to give his fucking life for you in battle. And I met him like an hour ago, and I'm just like, what? This is such an expedited character motivation. Like the upshot is that he's voiced, I mean, this will make no impact to you because you've never played the games, but he's voiced by the same voice actor that does Garrus in Mass Effect. And so very good voice, very good line delivery, very good. The other companions, you kind of meet them throughout the story. They aren't that interesting. Their backstories aren't that interesting. They don't progress in any, again, surprising ways. And I honestly, within the next few weeks, would probably forget all of their names. That's just, I'm not trying to be mean or anything. It's just how, I can recall so many companions from Mass Effect to this day. And I played that game decades ago. And I remember what their flaws were, what their motivations were. I cannot tell you like anything beyond surface level about these companions. And that's not because I didn't engage with them. It's just that they're not memorable. They're not interesting. The things that are pretty cool, I find, is the combat. So, I mean, you've seen some videos of the combat. It looks very Skyrim-ish.
Yeah.
Like a first-person perspective.
Yeah, and also the no big focus of the marketing is the whole thing of, well, you can play this game however you want. If you want to, be a sword and shield user, or if you want to dual wield wands, whatever, like you can do that. And I think typically that is a Skyrim thing where you can just mix and match whatever you for the most part. I think you can just mix and match weapons how you want. So I think that's why there's a lot of comparison drawn to that game specifically on that front.
Yeah, for sure. I think the versatility of your loadouts is the biggest selling point in Avowed. Like you said, you can dual wield wands. You can have a sword in your main hand and a pistol in your offhand. I never tried 2 shields. I don't think you can actually do that. There are some limitations, but you can dual wield single-handed swords or daggers, stuff like that. Then there's like 2-handed weapons like a bow or a musket or and you're also incentivized to trade out your loadouts because you essentially have 2 loadouts at any given time that you can swap between with the press of a button while you're fighting, which is kind of cool. Initially, I found this like super interesting. I had a wand and a grimoire in one loadout, so I could be like a ranged spellcaster. And then I had a sword and shield in my other, so in case people got close, I just swapped between them.
Yeah.
And that was like initially really fun. Like magic felt very overpowered and very engaging to use. The sword and the shield, the melee combat's very impactful. There's a good weight to everything, and they do this really smart thing where when you hit someone, there's a slight like pause, so you can feel, it almost feels like the blade is digging into your enemy, or you can feel that impact with each hit. There's a stamina system that governs all of this. Like every action you do, whether it's casting a basic spell with your wand or swinging your sword, takes a certain amount of stamina, and that stamina is also used for when you're blocking attacks, and it extends to your enemies too. Like they have a stamina bar, and if you or it's like a stun bar essentially, and if you fill that up, then you stun them and you can do kind of like a powerful attack on them. It's really cool. It's far more in-depth than a Skyrim ever was. It doesn't feel like the most in-depth combat system on Earth here, but it does the job of bridging like very straightforward first-person action and something a bit more complex that you have to think about. Especially when you take into consideration that all of your companions have their own abilities, that you can command them to using like a radial menu.
Yeah.
And they do all sorts of things. Like Kai will taunt enemies and apply stun onto them. You've got a mage. God, what's her name? Giata. Giata. She's like a mage character, and she can like heal your party or give you like barriers to block damage, stuff like that. And you've got your own sorts of abilities as you level up. You've got like specific godlike abilities that are more offensive ones, and then you've got your class-specific abilities that you can choose between. Like if you're a fighter or if you're a ranger, that augments. If you're a ranger, then you're focusing on single-handed weaponry and range weaponry. If you're a fighter, you're looking at more dual-wielding melee weapons or single-handed weapons like axes and stuff like that. But this is sort of where it starts to break down a little bit, I find. You've got these ability trees, which you're not trying to min-max everything, but you're trying to stay viable as the challenge scales up. And I find that the ability tree sort of pigeonholes you into one sort of playstyle or the other. So, for example, I started off with a wand and a grimoire and then a sword and a shield. But being a wizard is one whole skill tree in itself, and fighting effectively with the sword and shield is a whole other one.
Yeah.
And considering that you don't have like tons of points to distribute, I kind of moved towards just using a sword and a shield because splitting the two didn't really make me effective at either one.
Yeah.
And so very quickly I found myself not even using my second loadout because like my second loadout would just have another sword. It wouldn't really make sense to have something else in there. You can find overlap where like some abilities will apply to all single-handed weapons. So a sword, an axe, a dagger, stuff like that. And so you can mix and match between those, but you're still kind of pushed into the same style of play. You can't really shake up your styles of play between your loadouts. And maybe that's by design, but it just felt like I got to try this out in the beginning because the enemy levels are so low. But as soon as the challenge started ramping up, it was like, okay, this is not viable at all. And that's predominantly because of the way the game scales in terms of difficulty. You don't use enemy levels to denote difficulty. You use gear. So you won't be in like an area where enemies are of level 5 and you're of level 3. Depending on the area you're in, there's no like dynamic level scaling. It's just like you will walk into an area and enemies will be of a certain level, but it's determined by their gear. So they will have your gear doesn't come in flavors of like standard, rare, what is it, like magical, rare, unique, legendary, all those, all the different colors in like an RPG. There are those colors, but that's like a gradient of upgrading weapons. It's not determined by like the rarity of the weapon. So you'll start off with a standard weapon and you'll upgrade that from standard to fine to I don't know the scales, like excellent, then superb, and then legendary or something like that. And your enemies go through those same things. So if you roll up on a camp and they all have, say, rare or superior weaponry, and you've only got like fine, which is like level 2, so to speak, they will just absolutely smoke you. Like it won't even be a challenge. They'll do so much damage to you, and your weapons, because they're of a lower tier, actually get a damage penalty applied to them. So you do like 30% less damage, and your armor blocks 30% less damage incoming. So you literally just like, you will just die. You can kind of like fight through it. You can dodge and block and parry your way through it and try and chip away at enemies' health very slowly, but it's such like a slog, and you feel like you're completely underprepared for that challenge. That you know what I mean? It's like when you're in a area in an RPG that you absolutely feel like you shouldn't be in, and yet you just bang your head against it and try and do it anyway. It feels like that, and then it feels like that for I found most of the game.
I know, because
the only way to get more gear is to A, find it, or B, upgrade the existing gear you have. And the upgrades for existing gear require a bunch of like crafting materials, and I just never found that many. I always felt like I was scraping together everything I could just to keep my main sword and shield and my armor up to scratch. And even then, as I was progressing, I was constantly coming up against enemies that had like if you face an enemy that's too tough, they have like skulls on their health bars, and so it can go from like 1 skull to 3 skulls. I was constantly finding I was fighting like 2 to 3 skull enemies and just having to slog through these fights. And then constantly hear my companions scream at me, being like, maybe you should upgrade your armor. Maybe you need a better sword. I'm just like, for fuck's sake, I'm trying. I'm like, if I could find the crafting materials too, I would, you know. And weapons are doled out so infrequently that when I did find a weapon that was level appropriate, I'd either have to reset my skill tree because it would be a weapon type that I'm absolutely not spec to use.
Yeah.
Or it would be a weapon that, matches the level of the enemies in the area I'm in, but it's at the lowest tier of that level. So each level, like fine, superior, rare, it has like 3 notches within that level, and then it goes up like a new category.
Yeah.
And so whenever you find a weapon, it's at the lowest point. So if you're fighting enemies that are on the cusp of getting to another tier of weapon, you are now still behind by like 2 to 3, mid tiers, if that makes sense. And I just, firstly, it forces you to do side content. There's no way you can get through this game without engaging with side content, which is fine. Like, I don't mind that, but there is a fine line between you, like the game pushing you to engage with the content it has, or forcing it through grinding, because that's what I felt like I was doing all the time. It's like, I can't progress because I literally cannot progress.
That for me is like an immediate turn off.
It's just it's silly.
A good example that comes to mind, I haven't touched the franchise for years, but like Borderlands, I found had that problem where it just comes down to raw numbers, where it's like, cool, you're doing the main quest. Oh, you've stumbled onto an area where there's enemies that are like slightly higher than you, and that you just melt. And like, I get it, you can't just walk around shooting everyone in Borderlands, for example, but it's this weird thing of like, you shooting weapons, right? And it just comes down to raw number crunching. It's like, oh, my weapon's 3 levels lower, or whatever it was, than this enemy, and I've got to like offload clips upon clips into them, and it just like takes away from the fun. Whereas you look at an RPG like, I think like FromSoft get this so right with Dark Souls and Elden Ring and Bloodborne, where you're not strictly tied. Like, you're obviously leveling, and there's a whole number system in the background. But the way the games are structured, it never feels punishing. Like, a good example is you get people who do level 1 runs. Because you can. Like, even though the enemy might be like stupidly higher than you, it's not like you're doing 1 damage to them because there's, it's punishing you for being too low level. You can still walk into a high level area and feel like you can do enough attacks to kill an enemy. It's not like you've got to hit them 100 times because you just...
Yes.
Like, does that make sense to you? It's
100%.
There's like it's just the way it's the way it's structured and the way leveling works. It just doesn't punish you, doesn't force you to do side content. Like, if you want to do the hard stuff, you can. I just hate it. Like, I get turned off, and my immediate knee-jerk PTSD is like Borderlands, where it is just it's just gated off, and I'm like, there's nothing you can do about it until you level up or find better weapons, whatever, to be in that area.
No, I fully agree with that, and I think it's a weird thing. It's like the game is trying to do its thing. It wants you to engage with it in a certain way, and that's totally fine. I think it would be a lot more palatable if the side content was super interesting. Like, each of the you move between hubs, so it isn't one like contiguous open world. It's 1, 2, 3, like 4, I think, 4 big hubs that you explore, and they're quite sizable. But what I do like about them is that they're big, but you can get pretty much anywhere just by running, and it never feels like you're just running through a lot of empty space. You are running through a lot of enemy camps where a lot of the time they're just fucking way higher level than you, so it's just annoying. But like, the side quests are pretty standard fare. Like, you take on a bunch of bounties and you go and kill a bunch of enemies and return their bounties, or You get people in the towns that ask you to help with problems, and some of those are quite interesting. Like early on, there was some side quests. There was one side quest where I had to go into a mine and just to save a bunch of people, and it turns out there was this dude there, another godlike, who kind of just thought, oh, I need to like suck all these souls from these people that come into this mine to power this big it looks almost like an animatronic robot to capture the soul of some old god that betrayed him back in the day. Again, so much context that is just like delivered through lines of dialogue that I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
What's going on here?
Yeah, and it's like, oh, he happened at this, and I hear a word, I'm like, okay, Deadfire, that maybe that happened in that game, cool. And then I'm trying to wrap it's just too much. But that whole like quest was kind of cool. It felt a bit more like a main quest as opposed to just a fetch quest, side quest. There was some cool choices that I had to make that had some consequences within the world. Actually, that's one quick point. Like, you make choices. This is an RPG. The choices feel very natural. Like, early on, I made the choice to free someone in the like sort of prologue section from their jail cell, and they just like reappeared like 5 or 6 hours later in a side quest where I had to convince these smugglers to take in these 2 other people to smuggle them across the ocean to Adia. And I'd either have to pay them an obscene amount of money or kind of like physically threaten them to do that. But when I got there, this person that I'd let out from the jail cell earlier just rocked up and was like, oh, I'm actually part of this faction. Oh, you helped me earlier. These people are cool. We should just give them a pass. Okay. And I was like, oh, sweet. Okay, I'd almost completely forgotten that you existed. You know, put it that way. It wasn't like oh, if you free me, I will help you in XYZ way. It felt like a normal thing that happened. There was a time later on where I did a side quest in a mine, and I got the choice at the end to destroy the mine or keep it functioning because it had like elements that could be used for weapons.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of to and froing of like, we should destroy this mine so that a war doesn't break out, or we should keep it going because the rebels here kind of need it to protect themselves. And I was like, cool, I'll keep it going. And then I think an hour or 2 later, I ended up at a side quest where I got to the top of this tower and there were these 2 rebels there, and they were like ready to kill me for finding their hideout. And then just in the conversational window, it was like, oh, I actually helped you out by keeping this mine open. You should just let me pass.
Okay.
And so it wasn't a matter of the fact of like that quest led onto this one. It was I happened to do that quest before this one, and the choice I made now influences this one. And I found that really cool.
Yeah, it fed into your gameplay organically.
Exactly. It's not like a this faction will remember this choice sort of scenario. It's like, oh, okay, I made a choice and I can see how that choice is playing out in the world. And I thought that was pretty cool. I wish more of that stuff made a bigger impact on the main story, but in the side content, that facet is kind of cool. But in general, the side quests are very like fetch questy. It's like take a quest, go here. Some of them are way too long. Like some just put like 4 points on your map and you need to go speak to these people and they give you like micro side quests, and I'm just like, I have no time for this.
But you got to do it to get the
exactly. You need to make time for it, because otherwise you just cannot progress anymore. And so I just found the balance of that like way off. And it's not a case of, oh, I want to speedrun this thing as fast as I can. It's just like, I played this game for 30 hours. It's, you know, I'm pretty sure you could play it for probably 40 or 50, but it's not a 100-hour game. There's not enough content to support that. So I didn't rush through this thing, but it just felt like I was bashing my head against these arbitrary crafting requirements to keep up to speed. And it just didn't feel good. The combat isn't complex and deep enough to make being at such a disadvantage fun. Like you brought up Dark Souls. Dark Souls is a punishing game. It is a hard game. It's also, I find, a very fair game. It's balanced in a fair way. Same with like a game like Sekiro. You know, that game is all about parries, all about very drawn out long battles, but it has the combat system to support that and keep those fights interesting. This just feels like tedium. It's like dodge, hit, because the enemies are, you know, they have a very small subset of moves. There's a very small, limited pool of enemy types as well. And so it just doesn't feel that fun to consistently have to spend minutes chipping away at someone's health and then get hit twice, and oh, now you're at a checkpoint like half an hour ago, because the checkpoint system is also like quite brutal. It's just not fun.
I think just in general game design like that frustrates me, where it is just gating content off, like unnecessarily so. I mean, what does it matter if a player wants to mainline a story and roll credits in 10 hours or 15 or whatever, like whatever it is? It shouldn't be forced upon you. It's the same, like another example that comes to mind, we mentioned it, I don't know if I was talking to you or someone else, but how Spider-Man did it in the first game, where you can't not that you want to speedrun the game, but you reach the main narrative points are held back just inexplicably. You'll do like this big cool cinematic thing, and then Peter will go like, oh well, I guess I should go fight some crime in the city until next thing happens. You're like, just let me go to the map to the next quest, or like, why do you need to pad it out? It's just frustrating. I hate it when games do that. Like, it takes away my choice or my freedom to tackle it how I want to. And just from what you've described, it's a pity, because looking at Avowed, I do wonder, like, will I actually play it? Because when I look at it, it's like, yeah, visually it looks pretty cool. The fact that you can play, use different weapons, whatever, like that seems very enticing. But the moment you say, oh, look, I spend most of the game walking into areas and just feeling like underleveled, not, being forced to engage with content I don't really want to engage with. And even the side content, like, it's hit or miss, you say. Sometimes it's cool stories, and sometimes it's just like, it's just by the numbers fetch quest. I think I was listening to the Kind of Funny podcast just yesterday, and Andy Cortez was talking, it wasn't their review, he was just talking about playing Avowed. And he was saying, I think he gave such a good example of how the quests feel in terms of how they just miss. He was saying, like, when you do bounties in the game, you literally go up to the sky, and the guy's like, cool, go kill this person, and you do that, and you come back and you cash your bounty in. He's saying he just feels a situation like that. Imagine what he would have wanted from a game like Avowed is, imagine you go get a bounty and you go to somebody who you're there to kill, and the person is like, whoa, like, you're here to kill me. Actually, the guy who gave you the quest, he's the one who's got dirt on him. Like, I'll help you kill. Like, it's that sort of depth that he wanted. It adds interest. Like, oh, you mean the guy who's been giving me bounties is, like, he just says it's lacking that sort of complexity. It's just very like, you're just doing bounties. That's it.
Yeah. And every town has a bounty board, and you just accept all of them, and now there's like 8 spots on your map, and you're like, cool, I'm gonna have to probably do all of these just to get some crafting materials to kind of keep my weapons up to snuff. But also, these fights are gonna feel really bad because I'm already like at a disadvantage. So it bugs me, because like, especially because at the beginning of the game I was picking up, some weapons have like a unique attribute on them, so they have unique abilities. So there was one where I had a sword that was like on fire. It would set enemies on fire. It would also heal me for a certain percentage of enemies that I killed. Very cool weapon. I've now got that within the first 3 hours.
Yeah.
And now trying to keep that with me, or trying to keep it viable, is almost like impossible.
Yeah.
And I can't move those attributes to a new weapon. I have to basically just trade up to a very stock standard weapon, because it is a weapon of higher
just does more
gear
damage.
level.
Yeah.
And I mean, this happens in all RPGs. Like, this is not unique to Avowed, but I think other RPGs get around the issue by consistently giving you new stuff to make you feel like you are adjusting to the challenge ahead of you, whereas Avowed gives you so little that it just feels like you are never at the point of being comfortable. And not comfortable because the game is of a certain challenge and it's engaging to play at that disadvantage or challenge level. It's just annoying. And, there were moments where I even bumped down the difficulty to easy just to see how it would change things. And yes, it made some fights slightly easier. I think there was a smaller delta between, like, if you are 2 or 3 gear levels behind, like, what is the penalty? I think obviously they make that a bit tighter, but it doesn't change the requirements for crafting. It doesn't change how much you need to keep your gear leveled. And so I ultimately didn't feel like it changed much. It's a pity, and these are things that I think they could fix in a patch, like to balance it out.
Yeah.
They could reduce the cost of crafting materials. They could give you more rewards for side quests, because boy, those things are stingy. Like you can do a bounty and get like 700, 1,000 gold, and then when you're in, especially the last hub area, like a new weapon from a merchant, which is just like stock standard weapon at this area's like gear level, is like 70,000 gold, and you're like, well, I can't afford this. There's no way. I can't even afford, like, a lot of the times I'm going to merchants to try and purchase all their crafting materials, and there's so few merchants as well, they just run out of stock, but the crafting materials are so expensive. It's just, it's an imbalance. It's an economy imbalance. It's a crafting economy imbalance, and I hope they fix that, because I think if they do, it fixes a very big portion of this game. I don't think it fundamentally changes some of its biggest flaws, but I think you have a lot better of a time without that weight on you, or just a more engaging challenge.
Yeah, I was going to say, at the very least, this does sound like an example of a thing that can be addressed with a patch, where it's not necessarily a fundamental design flaw of, this is the way we've built the game and it's just impossible to fix, where it just comes down to raw numbers. Something you can address in the patch where, like you said, maybe they give more gold for side quests, maybe they drop more rewards, maybe they sit and they tinker with the gear levels and they adjust, how the progression works. So, like, for example, it is a thing of maybe you, and I don't mean to harp on this because this isn't the be or end all, but like maybe it is a thing of you could mainline the game because, they address the way you get gear. That if you're just ticking the boxes in your main quest, you are getting good drops. You're getting, like you said, that weapon that sets enemies on fire, but, in volume. Not volume, but, regularly enough that it keeps combat exciting and viable without you having to go and grind out something just to get to the next chapter or story beats, whatever it is. It's a
pity.
Yeah, it's a game I do want to play, so I'll definitely keep an eye on it. And I sincerely hope it is something that they... I mean, it is a thing of modern day gaming where if enough people are like, listen, Obsidian, you need to fix this, they'll fix it. So let's see. But it's interesting because I think the game generally has reviewed quite well. Like, I think...
Yeah, I was about to say, like, my views are somewhat in the minority. I think I fall on the lower end of the scale in terms of, like, raw review scores. I think it's on a Metacritic of 80 currently.
Yeah.
So,
which is very good.
It's like, for a game that's, like, really good nowadays. 80, between 85 and 80 is really good. So a lot of people... clearly didn't have some of the same issues I had, or had more enjoyment with the story, or so I'm not saying that you shouldn't give this a go. I think especially because it's on Game Pass, give it a go. And the first few hours are genuinely like the better parts of the game. I think the game gets worse as it continues, but I think it's still worth a shot. And especially if they start adjusting things and balancing things, I think you could, if they do, come back to this game in a few months and it will feel a lot better. But I think I didn't click with the game in the way that I thought I would or wanted to. Some people have, and that's fine. It's very reminiscent to me of the reception to Starfield. Like, if you look at the critical reception to Starfield, it's actually quite high. I think it's in the 80s still. Yeah. But you consider the public opinion of that game and it's not high at all. And I suspect that's kind of where Avowed is going to shake out. Like, decent critical reception, but I think there's going to be a lot of player feedback and critique that hopefully helps craft the game or helps guide the developers to balance it a bit better. That's my assumption. I don't know if that's true, but we'll see.